Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Marci Serota, and I will be talking to you about nutrition for hypothalamic obesity. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I am a registered dietitian, and my son was diagnosed with a craniopharyngioma when he was 3 years old back in 2010, developed hypothalamic obesity. It took me about 6 years to figure out how to manage it as best I could through diet and exercise. And he's actually doing really well today. So I'm here to share with you what worked for him and what works with many of the clients that I see who do have hypothalamic obesity. So this is just a picture of my son over here in the Philly shirt. This was right before his diagnosis at the age of 3. And then this was him at sort of the height of his HO, really before I figured out what to do. He had gained over 100 pounds in about a 6-year period. So this is him at the age of 9, was almost 180 pounds. So for those of you that maybe are new to this and feeling bad about not knowing what to do, I was in your shoes, and I know how you feel. So I'm happy to be able to walk you through what to do to helpfully treat this condition. So in order to understand what works best with hypothalamic obesity, it's good to understand the causes of the weight gain. Of course, it's from hypothalamic damage, which happens either as a result of the tumor or a result of the treatment. And that causes a few issues, one of them being hyperphagia, eating, lack of satiety. One is hyperinsulinemia, which means your body is just pumping out a lot of insulin, low metabolism, poor quality sleep, which makes it hard to exercise during the day and stay awake, and then hormone replacement if you do have panhypopituitarism or hypopituitarism. If the hormones are, if there's not a lot of attention to detail in how to replace those hormones, that can also contribute to weight gain. So in my experience, the best approach to treating this is a multi-prong approach. So I see the best results when we attack all of these issues at the same time. And I'm going to go with you how to do that. Go through with you how to do that. So these next couple slides are sort of, I do use them in my nutrition practice, but it was kind of hard gain knowledge as a parent to a child with HO. What is my role versus what is the physician's role? So I wanted to create a few slides to kind of go through with you the division of responsibility, so that you can find an endocrinologist that is willing to take on their part of making you the healthiest that you can be with HO. And so in terms of low metabolism, the physician's role is going to be to optimize hormone replacement, making sure that your free T4 is kept in the top third of the normal range. That's if you do have thyroid deficiency, and that you're receiving growth hormone. So even, if you're growing without growth hormone, if you're a child, but your levels are low, it can be helpful to give adult doses of growth hormone, which helps decrease the fat around the middle, around the tummy area. And it also puts the body into a muscle building state. We call it anabolism, and it helps increase energy levels. The patient's role in terms of the low metabolism is going to be to build muscle mass. So exercise is great, but the focus really should be on the type of exercise that builds muscle mass, because the more muscle you have, the higher your metabolism is. You could be the same weight and have less muscle and your metabolism will be slower. Or if you're the same weight and you have more muscle, your metabolism is going to be faster. So weight training, yoga, Pilates, ballet, circuit training, anything that's building muscle mass is really where you want to put the majority of your effort towards. In terms of the hyperphagia and hyperinsulinemia, the physician's role is going to be making sure that you are on the lowest dose of hydrocortisone necessary to prevent adrenal crisis, and to consider medications to address appetite and high insulin levels. Too much hydrocortisone can make you hungry and contribute to weight loss. In terms of poor quality sleep, physician's role is going to be to treat any sleep apnea if it's present, and to make sure that you're not getting your hydrocortisone too late in the evening, which can interfere with sleep. And the patient's role, and this is my recommendation, I didn't see any literature to support this, but I found it helpful with my son to give him a small dose of melatonin, which you can buy over the counter as a supplement about 20 minutes before bed. So what type of diet is most likely to be effective in an individual with HO? Well, in my experience, it depends on how severe the hypothalamic damage is. So there's a spectrum of HO and there's a spectrum of response to diet and exercise. So if you have sort of a milder case, you can get away with limiting your carb intake to about 90 grams of carb a day. I'm not talking about the weight of the food. I'm talking about the amount of carbohydrate in the food. A lot of that is going to be coming, in addition to the 90 grams of carb, you can be eating non-starchy vegetables, which do contain some carbohydrate, but it's so healthy and so low in carbohydrate that I didn't count it in that number. Those of you with moderate HO, or perhaps maybe a younger child who weighs less, I would limit to between 50 to 100 grams of carb a day total. And then those with severe HO, are going to need to stick to, anywhere from 30 to 50 grams of carb a day. And some may even need to go more towards a ketogenic diet, which is going to be less than 30 grams of carbohydrate a day. So that's something you want to work with a dietitian with, or your physician, make sure it's safe for you. And when I'm talking about carb, I'm talking about nature-made, minimally processed carb, and we will go through what that is. So why is this sort of lower or controlled carbohydrate diet helpful with HO? I think a very good explanation comes from the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity, which comes from Dr. David Ludwig out of Harvard Medical School and Boston Children's Hospital. He's a pediatric endocrinologist, and he has done a lot of research of late about, the cause of obesity, not in HO, just general obesity. And he's done some really, really nicely well done studies. And what he's come up with out of those studies is that not all calories are created equal. So if you're going to eat 100 calories worth of Tootsie Roll Pops, that is going to create a very different hormonal environment in your body than if you eat 100 calories worth of broccoli. So if you eat 100 calories worth of candy, you're putting your body into a state of high insulin secretion where your body goes into a storage mode where it doesn't want to let go of weight. Whereas if you're eating a more slowly natural digestible carbohydrate, such as broccoli, your body is not going to pump out quite as much insulin, and therefore your body is not going to store all those calories into fat cells. So, he recommends that high carb, low fat diets and highly processed carbs should be avoided because they do cause these prolonged high insulin levels. That high insulin levels drive calories into fat cells and leave fewer calories for the brain and muscle tissues. So that makes you feel very hungry. And that the high insulin glucagon ratio that results from these man-made highly processed foods result in low blood sugar, perceived starvation, and increase hunger and decrease metabolism. So that's lower metabolism is the exact opposite of what we want. And in one of his studies, or maybe it was his colleague, Kara Ebling, I am having trouble remembering at the moment, but they found that high insulin secretors, people who secrete more insulin for whatever reason, are most likely to benefit from a low carbohydrate diet. So I just wanted to show some pictures here. Over to the left is my son when he was on more of that, a little bit more processed food, higher carbohydrate, low fat diet. You can see he carried so much weight in the middle, was very unhealthy, had high blood pressure, he had fatty liver disease, it was very, very unhealthy. And then when we switched over to the low processed food, controlled carb diet, you can see how he slimmed down so nicely. So again, how does this apply to individuals with HO? Because of the hypothalamic damage, people with HO do have high insulin levels. And so we want to eat in a way that minimizes insulin secretion. And so they do fall into that category of patients who will respond best to a low carb diet. There's really no standard definition of low carb diet. I hate to use that phrase because nobody really knows what that means. And people like to make assumptions that it means no carb. That's not what it means. It just means, in my mind, lower than what the RDA recommends, which is 120 grams a day. Many patients with obesity also develop insulin resistance. So then that's going to cause your body to pump out more insulin on top of your already high insulin levels from diet and from hypothalamic damage. So since we know too much insulin causes weight gain, it's an anabolic hormone, it causes hunger, it causes the body to hold on to weight. That's what we want to avoid. So it makes sense that minimizing insulin secretion by limiting carbohydrates, specifically these highly processed, high sugar carbohydrates, may facilitate weight loss in individuals with HO. And that is what I saw with my son and with many of the patients that I see. So how can we minimize insulin secretion via diet? Just some guidelines. You may want to take a screenshot here, but limiting carbohydrate intake to about a half a cup 5 to 6 times a day. So that means like a half a cup of potatoes, or a half a cup of brown rice, or a half a cup of fruit, or a half a cup of non-sweetened whole milk yogurt. Those are examples of carbohydrates. Eating 90% nature-made food. So nature-made food is going to be food that either comes straight from the ground or comes from an animal that wasn't really changed by humans very much. Again, we want to avoid man-made highly processed carbohydrates and replace man-made highly processed carbs with fat, protein, and non-starchy vegetables. Eliminate or limit sugar and exercise 3 times a week. So just to give you sort of a visual of what I mean by nature-made food, you can see here we've got fish, whole grains, beans, nuts, avocado, any kind of meat. It doesn't matter what kind of meat it is, as long as there's not sugar added to it. And don't be afraid to eat fat. Fat is actually one of the only macronutrients that does not stimulate insulin secretion. So it helps you feel full, even with HO. So I do recommend eating more avocados, more nuts, more olive oil, olives, and even saturated fat, you really don't need to be afraid of. You need to put your focus on limiting the carbs and the sugar and the processed carbs. So if you're doing that, then you can actually get away with eating bacon and beef and high fat, high saturated fat foods. It's not going to cause your cholesterol levels to go high. It's actually going to help you either lose or stop gaining weight. So that's an important thing to understand. Animal protein, another great thing to be eating with HO. It does not cause very much insulin secretion. It doesn't contain any carbohydrate, and it does help you feel full because it usually will contain some type of fat, which helps delay the emptying of your stomach. And non-starchy vegetables are going to be pretty much the best food for you to be eating with HO. You know, for most people, I really don't put a limit on how much non-starchy vegetables they eat unless they're really having trouble losing weight doing all the other things I suggested. Then we may look at limiting those. And if, you know, you have a child or you yourself are finding you're eating so many non-starchy vegetables that you're getting a stomach ache or throwing up, in that case, you would want to place a limit on them. But they just are, they're really like medicine. I mean, they have all these phytochemicals and flavonoids and, you know, special properties that fight disease and lower blood pressure and prevent cancer. And they're very high in fiber, which is very good. In terms of keeping you full. So some examples of these nature-made carbs that are good to be eating. And like I said, these are the ones you want to limit to about a half a cup, 5 to 6 times a day. So you've got fruit, starchy vegetables, which are going to be, you know, like your potatoes, your winter squash, corn, and your whole grains, which can be anything from, you know, barley to black rice to brown rice to wheat berries, amaranth. Nuts, I'm sorry, not nuts, scratch that. Beans, legumes, those are going to be carbohydrates that are very healthy to eat that you want to limit to half a cup few times a day, whole milk, unsweetened yogurt, and of course, the non-starchy vegetables. So just to give you an example of what this looks like, these are all pictures that I've taken of food that I was feeding my son when he was on his weight loss journey. So in the upper left-hand corner, I've got hot dogs on a kebab with fruit. I don't know why there's only one in this picture. I would probably give him like 3 or 4 of those sticks for a meal, maybe 2 of them for a snack. And then the lower picture, we've got here clementines. So that's fruit and cheese. And then over here to the right, we have a plate of, and I want you to notice in every plate that I give my son with HO, there's always fat, there's always fiber, there's always protein, and there's always non-starchy vegetables. And there's always a little bit of nature-made carb. So here we've got a type of cracker called Mary's Gone crackers, which don't use flour. So I like to use those. Avocado, healthy fat. I've got bell peppers for the fiber and the non-starchy vegetables. I've got nuts over here. These are pistachios for fat, protein, fiber, some blueberries, some apple slices with almond butter, unsweetened. And then I've got some mozzarella cheese here with a little drizzle of balsamic vinegar. And it looks like a lot of food, and it is a lot of food, because when you don't eat those highly processed man-made foods, you can actually eat more calories and lose weight, because again, it's not sending your insulin levels soaring, so you can get away with eating more calories. These are a little bit more adult-friendly type snacks, olives, cheese, sausage, seeds, and clementines. And then over here, again, sort of similar, I've got cashews, blueberries, cheese, and olives. So just to give you an idea of things that you should be keeping in your refrigerator at home, most of the foods in your home, ideally, you want to keep in the refrigerator, because anything that can sit in your pantry for months and not go bad, not go rancid, is going to be a highly processed man-made food that's going to cause weight gain. So if most of your food is in the refrigerator, you're on the right track. We always keep in my house meat, cheese, eggs, nuts, and unsweetened nut butter, seeds, non-starchy vegetables, fruit, popcorn, avocado, unsweetened whole milk yogurt, and we will often do a lower carb, low sugar, grain-free granola. You can find those in the grocery store, or you can make your own. And just to give you an example of the man-made processed foods that we really want to be avoiding, anything that you can't make in your own kitchen is going to be considered a highly processed man-made food. So I don't care what health claims it has on it. I don't care how healthy it says it is. If you couldn't make it in your kitchen, it's not a good choice for hypothalamic obesity, because not only does it cause this higher insulin secretion, which promotes weight gain, but it also tends to be high in sugar, which causes food cravings and makes hyperphagia worse. And it is just harder to stick to an appropriate portion size, because the food industry makes these foods and they're making them to make a profit. They're not making them to be healthy, although they may claim that. What they want to do is get you hooked on the food so that you keep buying it and you keep eating it. So just an example of what they do to these man-made processed foods. So over here, you have wheat. So this is whole grain wheat pulled fresh out of the ground. That's what it looks like. And then if you jump over to the right side here, I have a diagram of a wheat kernel. So this is how nature has packaged it. And it's done so brilliantly, because on the inside, this purple layer is called the endosperm. So this is all the carbohydrate. It's broken down into sugar in your body. But what nature has done, and has packaged it in a way where they've also put germ in there, which has got fat and fat soluble vitamins. So that helps give you a sense of satiety, helps delay gastric emptying. And then they've put this bran, this insoluble fiber, this outer layer all around it. And what that does is it causes your body to have to work a lot harder to digest this. So your body has to produce all these enzymes and your stomach has to churn for a long time to break down all this fiber and germ in order to get to the sugar part. So once it gets to the sugar part, it's not going to stimulate as much insulin secretion because the digestive process has been slowed down. Well, what they do when they make refined flour, they take away the bran, they take away the germ, and they leave you with just the inner carbohydrate, the inner layer of endosperm, which then they grind into a white fine powder called flour. This is digested in your body within minutes. It goes straight into your bloodstream as sugar and results in an insulin surge, which is what we're trying to avoid, because then that results in you feeling hungry even though you've just eaten. Sugar is really one of the biggest causes of obesity in the world. It's addictive. It increases dopamine levels in your brain in the same way that taking amphetamines does. It causes that feel-good center in your brain to light up. So that's why when you eat something with a lot of sugar, like let's say you eat a piece of cake or you eat a Reese's peanut butter cup, your reaction is just to be like, oh my God, that was so good. And then you continue to eat the food because you're chasing that good feeling. So it is addictive in that way, because some people, and not everybody gets addicted to sugar, but some people do. A lot of children do. And when you already have hyperphagia and you don't feel full and you're thinking about food all the time, when you're eating a lot of sugar, it just makes that worse, because again, it's playing around with your insulin levels and causing you to feel more hungry. So in my experience, sugar greatly exacerbates hyperphagia and food seeking in those with HO. And many of my clients do see a decrease in the intensity of their hyperphagia when they eliminate sugar or limit it to, maybe one small dessert per week. And you also want to try to avoid sugar in the first 5 ingredients of any packaged food that you're eating. So sugar goes by many names, and you do need to, when you are eating man-made foods, you need to look at the ingredients, because sugar has a lot of names in the food industry. They may not put sugar in the ingredients. They might say, dextrose or beet sugar or barley malt, fruit juice concentrate, maltose, evaporated cane juice. These are all words for sugar. And so again, if you pick up something that you want to buy, maybe it's, a bag of popcorn at Starbucks. Popcorn's fine. It's a great nature-made food. But then you look at the ingredients, and if they've got, sugar listed in the first 5 ingredients in there, that's not the popcorn you want to be eating, because again, it's going to increase those food cravings. Unfortunately, sugar is hidden in a lot of foods, specifically in the United States, but it's happening more and more in other countries too. There's sugar hiding in salad dressings, tomato sauce, deli meat, any frozen foods. Ketchup is a big one. I have a lot of clients that think they're doing such a great job at avoiding sugar, but they're using a lot of ketchup, and then that ends up exacerbating their food cravings and sort of is sending them off the rails in terms of what they've been trying to do with their diet. Yogurt, anything fat-free or low fat is pretty much a code word for high sugar, because they take the fat out of a food and then they replace it with sugar to make up for the taste. So individuals with HO should avoid the following foods as much as possible. Take a screenshot of this: fruit juice, milk, soda, too much fruit. So you want to limit your fruit to about 3 to 4 servings a day, half-cup servings. Dry cereal, processed food, sugar and artificial sweeteners, food marketed to be low-fat or fat-free, as I said, bread, and refined wheat flour or rice flour. Some examples of some HO-appropriate snacks. Again, these are going to be mostly nature-made foods. Over here, I've got mozzarella cheese fruit kebabs, and then these are vegetable avocado rolls wrapped in rice paper. We've also got in the middle, I've got a tuna salad where I did not use mayonnaise, although it's okay to use mayonnaise as long as there's no sugar in it. It's fine. I just didn't in this particular snack. I put some vegetables in there and some olive oil and vinegar. This was a snack I sent my son to school one day: turkey, fruit, and non-starchy vegetables. If your hyperphagia is really severe, as my son's was, he had a very difficult time waiting between meals and snacks to eat. So the minute he finished eating, he would just stare at the clock and ask me over and over again, Mommy, when's it time to eat? When's it time to eat? When's it time to eat? And he was so young. It was so difficult for him. So what I would do is I would just feed him non-starchy vegetables in between meals and snacks. So these are just some examples of the creative ways I did that. It doesn't have to be raw. In the middle here, you see I've got zucchini that I've spiralized into noodle looking shapes, and I sauteed it with butter and salt and pepper and put some Parmesan cheese on it. This is a salad with nuts. This is sliced zucchini. Some other examples are going to be cucumber boats with chicken salad. And then I've got eggplant wrapped around turkey bacon. And these are pizzas where I used eggplant slices instead of crust. Examples of some HO dinners. I'm using, again, nature-made carbohydrate. So here I've got spiralized sweet potatoes. And then I've got chicken, which I've breaded with ground almonds, flaxseed, and Parmesan cheese, and some vegetables there. This is an egg frittata. This is a salad where I've got garbanzo beans as the carbohydrate, cheese and tomatoes. And then over here, this is turkey sausage with spiralized butternut squash and sweet potato. And then I've got a bunch of spinach and other vegetables in there. So, does hypothalamic obesity respond to diet and exercise? It is possible. You do need to understand, again, there's a spectrum of HO and a spectrum of response to diet and exercise. So, whether or not you're able to lose weight or just stop the weight gain is going to depend on how much damage was done to your hypothalamus, the size and location of the tumor, and the experience of the surgeon or radiation oncologist who treated your tumor. It's also going to depend in large part on family support. It's not realistic to ask somebody, especially a child, to eat a certain way and avoid certain foods if those foods are being brought into the house and eaten by other family members. So this is something a family really needs to do all together. And I would advise keeping those man-made, highly processed carbohydrates out of the house altogether. If you want to go out once a week for a dessert, go out, get a small child-sized ice cream or have a piece of cake, at a birthday party, but I wouldn't keep those things in the house because they're impossible not to eat. And success, again, is going to depend on having an endocrinologist that either really understands HO and has had success in treating it and will optimize hormone replacement. Or if not, somebody who's at least willing to take some guidance from a neuroendocrinologist. I know that I, at one point, took my son to a bigger medical center where there were neuroendocrinologists who studied HO, and I got her to write down a bunch of recommendations, and they took them home to our endocrinologist here. And because he's awesome, he was more than happy and grateful to take guidance from somebody who had more experience in this condition than he did. So that's the kind of endocrinologist that you want to be looking for. If you have one that really isn't interested in what you have to say or what anyone else has to say, not open to new ideas, then it may be time to find somebody new. So that is the end of my presentation. I do have a book, Hungry for Solutions, which you can buy on my website, marciserota.com, or you can buy it on Amazon. If you're out of the country, I would buy it on Amazon for sure. And I do have a website with all sorts of helpful information, so you're welcome to check that out, even if you're not interested in buying the book. And I appreciate you coming to my talk today, and we are ready to open up for questions.
Thank you so much, Marci. My chat has just dropped down. So Lynn has a comment here. Thank you for the presentation. I have a few questions. Any recommendations for doing this diet when vegetarian? Oh, this is a good one, especially with regards to protein sources.
Yes. Well, I'm assuming you mean vegetarian and not vegan. So you can still include cheese, eggs, nuts, tofu, tempeh, edamame. These are going to be all sources of protein that you're going to be using. So you can absolutely still do it. There's no problem at all.
She's got a few good questions here, so I'll keep reading. What is the reasoning behind splitting up food throughout the day? That is 3 meals, 3 snacks, plus extra non-starchy veggies, as opposed to just 3 meals a day?
Well, part of it depends on whether or not you have hyperphagia. So if you have this, ravenous appetite where you're thinking about food constantly and you just can't feel like you ever get enough to eat, that would be one reason for eating, 6 times a day, plus the non-starchy vegetables. If you do not have hyperphagia, it's less important that you do that, although I would still recommend eating 4 to 5 times a day because it's just you're getting a lower carbohydrate load at once. And so that's going to help decrease the amount of insulin that your body's pumping out in response to the food you're eating. So if you're only eating 3 meals a day and you're eating 90 grams of carbohydrate, well, you're going to have to split that up into, 30 grams of carbohydrate per meal, which is going to be, just like I said, more of a higher carbohydrate load than 15 to 20 split up a few more times a day.
And she's got a third question here, but I just want to remind everyone too, if you do have questions, you can just write them into the chat and I'll read them out for Marci. So go ahead and do that now. So Lynn's third question is, are the portion sizes in your book specifically for HO children, or are they also suitable for HO adults?
So they're very generic. It's really impossible for me to, food plans really need to be individualized. So I have 2 example food plans in the book. And I have a third, which is just kind of like, don't really follow a food plan, but, here's some hints to kind of help you eat the right kinds of foods. So yeah, I have one in there that sort of is you really just have to try both and see what works for you. So yes, I do mostly talk about children in my book, but the food plans there can be used for adults. If you find it's not enough food for you, I do sell, I think, a $15 adult food plan on my website. It's a digital download that you can buy. But you just kind of have to play with it to see what works.
There's a bunch more really good questions coming through. This is a great one. This is from Christy Randis. What are your thoughts on a keto diet?
So a keto diet is kind of a last resort in my mind. I would try a controlled carbohydrate diet first. If that doesn't work, I would try a lower carbohydrate diet, which, like I said, is more like 30 to 50 grams of carb a day. And then if that is not working, then you can consider a ketogenic diet. They're just very difficult to follow. And most people, aren't able to follow them for a long period of time. So I don't recommend following it to lose the weight and then going off of it, because then you're just going to gain the weight back. So, it's something that you can try, but you also need to be aware that if you have diabetes insipidus and you do not have an intact thirst mechanism, meaning you don't feel thirsty and your sodium, is all over the place and you end up in the ER, that ketogenic diets can mess with your sodium levels. So you want to do it under the guidance of your endocrinologist. Make sure you're drinking broth and pouring a lot of salt on everything that you eat, and just be real careful. You're welcome.
Georgette McNally has a question. She says, thoughts on Miracle noodles or related products?
I think you're talking about the cone jack noodles, which are fine. They're absolutely fine to eat. They have almost no carbohydrate in them. So you can absolutely make that part of your meal. because I do like to include some carbohydrate in every meal. If I was using those types of noodles, I would still also put some other carbohydrate in there to go with it. But yes, those are totally fine if you like the taste. Some people don't like the taste, but if you like the taste, they're a great tool to use. And you can even, mix them in with, I don't know, spiralized zucchini or sweet potato noodles or something like that.
Great. Yeah, she confirmed here she was referring to the plant-based noodles. So thank you for that. And somebody asked for your web address. I put that in the chat as well, so everyone can go and look at the chat. And Marci, it's marciserota.com, pretty easy. There's a question here. I think there's a follow-up to it about artificial sweeteners. So this specifically coming from Elizabeth Leggett. I love all the meals you showed. Thank you for all of these wonderful ideas. Our son also has DI and does not have thirst. And we have been giving him some squirts of 0-calorie sweetener in his water to get him to drink. In all other areas, we have a very low sugar, low carb diet. But do you think this 0-calorie sweetener could be impacting his insulin spikes or hunger?
I think you always have to look at what's the most dangerous thing going on and avoiding it. And in your situation, the most dangerous thing going on is your child's sodium getting out of whack. So if you need to add something with artificial sweetener to get him to drink, then you should do that because, it's the insulin. First of all, there's no studies that are showing for sure that it's going to cause insulin secretion. There's some mixed research out there. So it may not be happening, but again, you need to do what you need to do to get your child to drink the fluid that they need. So I wouldn't worry about it in your case at all.
Okay, we've got a few minutes left so people can continue dropping their questions in. There's another one here from Dave Holtzman. Dave says, can you recommend how to identify an endocrinologist with experience in HO and specifically as oxytocin therapy?
Are you asking for a child with HO or an adult?
That's a good question. Dave, if you're still there, you want to type into the chat? That's a good distinction.
So if it's a child with HO, the only one that I know that uses oxytocin and will prescribe it right now is Jennifer Miller at University of Florida. Adults, I am much less, I don't know. I don't have anybody as an adult that specializes in HO. I know that the Raymond A. Wood Foundation is working hard to create a list. You may want to check on their website and see if they've got it up yet. If they don't, keep checking back. But in my experience, adult endocrinologists, or, sometimes even if the endocrinologist won't prescribe it, the general practitioner will, or a psychiatrist will. Adult doctors are more willing to prescribe off-label medications than pediatric physicians are for children. So in that sense, what you would just want to do is bring them, whatever literature you can find about it. Or, I know with my clients, like I'll write a letter to the doctor sort of suggesting some things that they can try that are off-label. And I find that the adult doctors are much usually willing to prescribe things much more readily than the pediatric doctors are, because they're dealing with little kids.
And he confirmed it was for adults and says, thank you very much. And Dave, yes, I can confirm as well, as Marci mentioned, that we are putting together a list of endocrinologists, both for children and for adults. And just like Marci said, I'm not sure if it's on the website yet, but you could reach out to us through the website. There should be like an information question submission there, or just an email, and we'll get back to you. Obviously it depends on where you're at in the country or the world, but we're happy to provide guidance there. And actually, one thing just to add to what Marci said, I agree with everything she said. And in addition, it always helps if you've identified a compounding pharmacy, because the physicians often don't, they say, sure, I'm happy to do it, but you can't get it from Walgreens or CVS. So I'm not sure what to do. And if you can, talk with other people about where you might be able to source it from, that helps.
Yeah, I know that Dr. Miller recommends Empower RX in Houston, and they will ship it out. And there's another one, I think in Florida that she uses, but I can't remember what the name of it is.
And then here's another question. Did you have trouble transitioning your son to a more healthful veggie full diet?
I did. And I used a lot of positive reinforcement it was just kind of like, oh, well, if you can, start to eat healthy, and, you reach a certain milestone in terms of that health, which could be, let's say we get your triglycerides down to a certain level, or maybe, I hate with kids to focus on weight, but it is something that's easy to measure. If you lose a certain amount of weight, what we did in my case is we said, we'll take you to Disneyland. So it doesn't have to be that big of a thing. I honestly, when I offered that, I wasn't sure he was going to be able to do it. I mean, I was just experimenting. So I offered this sort of big thing that I had to follow through with, because he did end up losing the weight. But you can offer positive reinforcement in the form of, a gift or a trip, or, something that they're allowed to do, more screen time, whatever it is. And that's usually pretty helpful with children. And also showing them that you are doing it with them is helpful. That was a big one. I said to my son, he was very upset. I said, look, you're not doing this alone. We are all doing this with you. I'm doing it, your brother's doing it, and your dad's doing it. So we're all doing this together. And I also promised him that he would not starve. We would be giving him a lot of food. And so, he was willing to give it a try after all of that.
We've got a few more questions here in just a few minutes more left. One thing I just also wanted to say, it's interesting you're talking about the, not avoiding saturated fats and not being the problem. One thing that I was kind of reminded of in a discussion with someone recently about bacon, and some bacon is incredibly high in sugar. Like there's a lot of brown sugar added,
Yes.
And a lot of other sweeteners in there. So I guess that's an important thing too, not just grab any old bacon off the shelf, but to really search for one that's got no sugar in it and limited.
Thank you, Dean. Yes, huge. Very important. I appreciate you bringing that up. Like I said, I always look at the labels and I always look at the ingredients. And I try to find a product that has less than 5 grams of added sugar per serving. And then in addition to that, I look at the ingredients and I try to avoid things that are going to have sugar in the first 3 to 5 ingredients. So Great. You do want to find a low sugar bacon, low sugar hot dogs, low sugar everything.
Yep. And here's another one from Elizabeth. Do you think we need to be careful about which types of fruit to allow? Some are higher on the glycemic index than others. Although that's actually a question, sorry. Are they? Apples are okay, but not bananas. We are really struggling with the cravings when we allow bananas.
Okay, well, so that's a key. If you are really struggling with the cravings after eating anything, then that is not a good food for you to keep in the house. So that's kind of my general rule of thumb. I mean, my son had the same thing with watermelon and grapes. We couldn't keep him in the house because it would just make his cravings much worse. As far as glycemic index goes, I really never worried about it. I had enough to count and think about that I didn't really pay attention to the glycemic index of fruits because they're all lower than, glycemic index than other man-made processed foods. But if that's something you want to do, you can, but it's not necessary.
Here's a good one that I really want to get to. We're not going to get to everything, but with the kids back in school, do you have any ideas for the cafeteria?
It's really tough. I would, I didn't really have to deal with the cafeteria because my son went to a school where everybody brought their lunch. But it is really, really hard. I mean, you want to send your child their lunch every day. I wouldn't give them money to buy food. But it does make things very difficult, because they are going to end up trading food and getting access to things that are probably not going to be great for them. And it's a tough call. I mean, do you want to, it depends on how unhealthy your child is. Like when my child was already at the point where he was 180 pounds at 9 years old and the doctor was recommending gastric bypass surgery. Well, I was at a point where I had no choice. I had to tell his teachers, you need to watch him and make sure he's not doing that. Give him something to do during lunch. Let him go to a younger class and read a book, or let him go do something, play on the playground, something different. But if your child is, maybe you have a diagnosis, but their weight isn't that severe, maybe you just wait and see how it goes and give them positive reinforcement for not obtaining those foods that are going to make their hyperphagia worse. And it doesn't have to be black and white. There's room for some man-made foods. It's just not something, you want to be doing every single day.
Marci, this has been fantastic. We've come to the end of the session now. There are still some unanswered questions, but we will have time, everybody, at the end of the day in the general Q&A session. So please join that, and you can follow up with anything we missed then. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. I'll see you at the Q&A, hopefully.